Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to go through kind of how to manage the entire fellowship experience and life cycle using Reviewr from really start to finish. It's actually going to be broken down into probably about a 5-part webinar series. And so today we're going to kind of touch on at a high level some of the key elements that make up kind of powering a fellowship process. And then each of those elements will have kind of its own deep dive into some of the more specifics, not only best practices and guidance on how to facilitate that, but also kind of how it works within Reviewr. So before we get too deep into things today, maybe just a really quick introduction might be helpful. So my name is Kyle Fredericks. I'm the CEO here at Reviewr. And so kind of an intro, we built our company back in about 2012. And it kind of brings us to why we're here today and really kind of the reason why Reviewr exists. So we built our company based off of our own experience in these types of programs. So we call them funding opportunities. So things like scholarships to grants to fellowships and really everything in between. And back in 2012, tools like Reviewr unfortunately didn't exist. And so if you think through, kind of a fellowship or a grant process, it was done via paper. And so our team's involvement came primarily from like the review perspective and like the evaluation side of things. And so believe it or not, we had binders showing up at our doorstep. You'd have one binder per applicant. Within each of the binders, you'd have 15 to 20 pages. You'd have all the deliverables. And a lot of times there was like a printed off spreadsheet or some type of scorecard. And we were tasked with kind of handwriting in our feedback and our notes and our scores, and then either mailing it back in, or we meet in person on a Saturday and have like an 8-hour deliberation meeting with our peers and other committee members. At the time, it was okay. There weren't a whole lot of alternatives of how to power these programs. Kind of where our frustrations came in, though, is that how do you provide value to everyone involved? If you think through a scholarship or a fellowship, obviously those who get selected are going to get a tremendous amount of value. However, of the 100 or so applicants that you might receive, how do you provide value to the 95 that don't get selected? And so obviously as part of a review committee, here we are leaving our notes and our feedback and conducting reviews in a way in hopes of maybe sharing it back to those applicants. That way they can kind of learn and say, hey, you weren't selected for a fellowship this year, here's why. And of course, that can take that feedback and that experience for some self-development, go off and secure funding and have success elsewhere. Unfortunately, though, because of the lack of processes in place, that was really not happening. Over time, these programs started to grow and transition. You started to see programs go on quote unquote online. So what that really meant is you'd see, online web forms being filled out. You'd have emails being submitted with the applications attached, a bunch of downloadable documents and attachments being submitted. And again, without tools like Reviewr, there weren't a whole lot of alternatives and ways to power these programs. What ended up happening, however, though, was an overwhelming amount of additional work, probably more so than even the paper-based processes. So as a fellowship admin, now you're getting a bunch of emails or forms being submitted to you. You're downloading them, you're exporting them, you're recompiling them, you're putting them onto like Dropbox and Google Drive, sending out spreadsheets to your committee members. And now you have all these disconnected workflows and processes that are happening. And really, the straw that broke the camel's back for us is over time, we started to hear these horror stories, very specifically a scholarship program where there was actually a bunch of submissions and a spam filter. And so when the review committee sat down to conduct the reviews, they didn't even look at all the applications that they collected. And so here we are sitting here, not compliant any longer. It's a terrible experience for everyone involved. And so that's kind of what led us to build Reviewr, which is an online platform that was really intended to run the entire fellowship lifecycle from literally start to finish, from the intake of the applications, all the management tools, the review and selection, the post-fellow engagement, reporting and compliance and security, all that kind of stuff. And so the idea here is kind of two parts. One is very operational. How do we help you guys and your team spend less time and energy managing the logistics of a fellowship so you can kind of go off and fulfill your missions and focus on kind of the more important elements of your daily jobs, while at the same time, the second piece to this is overarching, elevating the experience for the applicants, the committee members, potential partners and sponsors, making sure that we're staying inclusive, making sure that the programs are compliant and things like that. So kind of a high level intro of why we exist here at Reviewr. The best part about what we do is I would say we do thousands of these campaigns every single year. And so by now I'd be surprised if there's a workflow or a process that we haven't seen yet. And that, ranges from, the American Hospital Association doing their programs to Harvard and everybody in between. And so the idea is that we can kind of pull different levers and proven processes that we've developed over this past decade to make our platform feel highly customized to your unique experience and to your unique workflows without recreating the wheel. So So today we're going to kind of dive into maybe 4 or so key elements. Number 1 is that we're going to take a look at kind of the overarching fellow profile process, the workflows, the review and selection process, and then kind of ongoing fellow engagement, as well as kind of the compliancy and the data reporting and the security and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. What we're going to do is we're going to do a split screen. Half my window is going to be kind of some discussion points, and the other half is going to be Reviewr. And we're going to try to kind of side by side kind of talk through these fellowship lifecycle experiences while kind of introducing how those fit within Reviewr. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here we are on half my page is kind of some discussion points, and the other half we're going to use some real examples of kind of how Reviewr can be used to power these programs. So maybe to kick things off with, let's talk a little bit about kind of the fellow profile concept and the fellowship application side of things to these programs. The concept of a profile is incredibly powerful and very, very important in the grand scheme of things, and really kind of the premise of how Reviewr was built. So if you think through a fellowship process or a fellowship submission workflow, there's a lot of moving parts. You have the fellow themselves, you have the information that you're collecting from them. So you have everything from, the short answers and essays that are personal information. You have file uploads. Sometimes those files themselves aren't even being uploaded by them. It could be external file uploads that are coming in. So things like reference letters and transcripts. You also have to kind of think through the different types of workflows and processes. So a lot of the fellowships that are using Reviewr have kind of baked in eligibility quizzes and criteria. So for example, if there's 5 different fellowships, each of those 5 might have very, very specific criteria of who can apply. And so if you think through kind of the submission process, maybe, kind of based off of the answers that people are filling out, we're actually showing people what fellowships are even eligible for, as well as not wasting their time by allowing them to apply for programs that really wouldn't be relevant to them. You also have kind of the bigger picture. So long-term, the ability to save and log out, come back later, the multi-phase or elements that make up a fellowship. So maybe starting with like an intent to submit, you have the full application, the multi-phase deliverables, you have kind of the post-selectee deliverable side of things, you have the interviewing, and then even bigger picture, you have things like communication, you've got the results. And so the idea behind profiles within Reviewr is to kind of address every one of those elements that I just talked through. So you have all these different elements and pieces that make up, the applicant experience. And we want to avoid them living in a bunch of different locations or happening in a bunch of different ways versus within Reviewr, them actually getting kind of aggregated into one centralized spot. And that's kind of the concept behind profiles. It's also what separates us from your 99% of other tools out there, like your random form builders and your surveying tools, because ultimately those are just used to collect the data. And then once you collect it, now you got to kind of use a bunch of other tools to do something with it. And so the premise behind the profiles, that's kind of where everything starts. So to kind of walk us through what that looks like here, I have one of our clients, it's the AP Johnny Foundation, who uses us for a postdoctoral research fellowship. And everything with them starts with a microsite. So within Reviewr, microsites are actually part of the platform. It's all kind of a wiki editor pre-populated based off of the content in the tool. But the idea here is to kind of output, an overview of the program, rules, regulations, and then the main item here is to actually create those profiles that I talked about and begin the submission process. So within Reviewr, you actually own the data 100%. The only thing that we require from the applicants is who they are. And then once we have that, they can save, they can log out, they can come back later. But then as far as the actual data being collected and the data capture process, that is completely up to you as a program manager of how you want to collect it. So again, you own the data. Reviewr isn't going to tell you, specific things you have to collect. So if I go ahead and create my account or create my profile, again, that's step number 1. And then that leads me into the first process of a fellowship application, which is the actual forms themselves. So Reviewr has a very, very robust library of components and modules that can make up the application experience. And I try to highlight and use that term experience quite a bit. And the reason why I say that is because we don't want to have people filling out generic forms or kind of overfilling things out that may not even be relevant to them. And so I always like to position Reviewr like a Goosebumps book, if you remember those. So you kind of choose your own journey based off of answers that you give the platform. So really common workflows within Reviewr might be some type of checkbox or drop down that asks, hey, what fellowship is this for? Again, maybe they're filling out some type of eligibility criteria, and then based off of the results that they put in. So for example, in this case, maybe there's certain fellowships provided to medical students versus PhDs. If I scroll back up, maybe this one has 3 different years of funding requested. And so for example, if I choose a 2-year, I might see different questions versus if I choose a 3-year. And so again, they're what we call adaptive workflow. So again, based off of answers in the form, you're going to see that things might shuffle around a little bit and display relevant questions based off my answers. Again, as I go through here, the platform is going to be able to capture really any type of data requirements you have, everything from drop downs to checkboxes to open-ended text fields to essays. Reviewr is also very profile or very file centric. And so what I mean by that is we can virtually take in any file type. And we will look at this in a bit more detail when you get into like managing the workflows and the processes. But every document that gets uploaded to Reviewr actually gets embedded. And so what I mean by that is if an applicant submits a letter of reference, or if they submit a video file or a PowerPoint or even an Excel spreadsheet, we don't care. All of those documents are going to embed themselves right into Reviewr. And so that means that when you and your staff or the review committees come in to access the information, they never have to leave the tool. They can view all the files right within those applicants' profiles. Other kind of unique elements to Reviewr that I guess are very specific to fellowships to be things like letters of recommendation. So as you can see here, the actual submitter or the fellow isn't going to be submitting their own references on behalf of themselves. They're going to have somebody else fill it out. So what's going on here is that the applicant will put in the name of who's writing their reference. They're going to put in their email address. And then as soon as they press submit, it's actually going to trigger a notification to go to the reference that says, hey, Kyle's request that you submit a letter of recommendation on his behalf. And then what they would do is actually click on a link to upload that letter. And then in real time and automatically it gets appended auto to my profile. So you have all of these, I guess, recommendations coming in elsewhere that get aggregated in one centralized place. So again, the idea behind the profiles is to hold on to application forms, file uploads, communication, results, workflows, all the activity that's happening about a fellow will get stored there. Bigger picture, once fellows are selected to your program, maybe you want them to come back to their profile and submit, post deliverables that we'll look at here in a bit. Maybe they have to fill out like thank you letters or surveys or reapply for additional funding. All those types of things become powerful and become doable within Reviewr profiles. All right, so here we are kind of talking about kind of the workflow management and really where the magic happens for program admins and fellowship providers. It's kind of your command center and your command hub to really manage every element of the entire fellowship lifecycle. Again, from start to finish. And when I mean that, I mean literally everything from accessing the fellow applications, communicating with not just your fellows, but also review committee members and other staff, creating review workflows, assigning out those applications to committees, and everything in between. So what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of look at some of the main elements that kind of make up your command center and kind of the key elements that I think make a big difference when it comes to managing these different types of workflows. So right off the bat, when you're coming into your dashboard, you're able to see, how many days are remaining until whatever dates and deadlines you might have. And then where are your applicants in the grand scheme of things? Are they fully submitted? Are they in progress? If so, because, humans will always procrastinate. Who are they? How far have they made it? You can send them built-in reminder messages. You can kind of usher them along and kind of shepherd them through the workflow and the process. Are they fully submitted? Have they already been reviewed? Things like that. As far as dates and deadlines go, making it very easy to see kind of where you're at today, what those next milestones might be. And then of course, on the fly, if you need to open up deadlines or kind of grant permission and access to other people, being able to do so as you kind of progress through the workflows. We're also going to show you at a high level some of the key communication that's gone on. So again, within Reviewr, the idea here is that you and your review staff can look at submissions, you can communicate with them, you can communicate with one another, you can leave notes, but then on kind of your command center, you're able to in real time kind of see the most recent communication and notes that have been left within the tool set. So obviously some best practices here. Again, humans will always wait until the very last minute to conduct their applications. And so it's nice to be able to track, kind of what your dates and deadlines are. And then, using some of our automation tools, maybe set it up so auto reminders go out 5 days before the deadline, or even like every 5 days that they're in that incomplete submission status. It's also nice because it's a leading indicator potentially of overarching volume. So a lot of our clients will have some type of like pairing of X number of review committee members to X number of applicants. And so if your program grows dramatically, you won't know that until you're done collecting applications. However, if you have a large number of in progress submissions, more so than in years past, it might be a leading indicator of a larger volume this year. And then it might help you kind of idea, hey, I got to go recruit some additional committee members and some additional judges. That way, when you go to conduct the reviews, you're not scrambling last minute to kind of expand the team or really overwhelming your teams and your committees with more applications than they're kind of ready to look at. Some of the other items here that we want to take a look at is kind of the data being collected. So we'll look at some of those applicant profiles in just a minute, but obviously things like blinding of the data, keeping things fair and compliant from the committee members, some of the randomization tools, things like that. So kind of going through my list here, one of the more powerful tools within Reviewr is called groups and divisions. I call it bucketing. And it's a really powerful process to manage workflows. And what I mean by that is kind of two different sides of things. Number one is kind of the categorization of submissions that you've received. So for example, if you do 5 different fellowships, you might have 5 different buckets, one for each fellowship. It might be a combination of that as well as phases, right? So maybe applications come in and they go through an internal review process. Then they go through a second phase of review, which is a bit more comprehensive scoring. Phase 3 might be an interviewing process where you actually will conduct interviews with the fellow applicants. And then from there, they move on to like a final selection phase. And so basically what we're looking at here is buckets. And the idea is quite simple, but yet quite powerful. When people apply to your program or to your fellowships, ideally there's some type of automation that says, hey, Kyle is applying for the Academy Oscar Fellowship. So as soon as he presses that submit button, we're going to put him into a bucket with all the other fellow applicants who chose that bucket. So what's going to end up happening at that point is then you can assign that bucket out to a review committee. So now when these individuals log into their Reviewr accounts, they're only able to see the fellowship applications in the bucket that they've been given access to. Other examples, we work with an aerospace fellowship where they're actually pairing up applicants with about 20 or 30 different host companies. And so for them, each of the different host companies is a bucket. So if I choose, Acme Corporation, it puts me into a bucket called Acme Corporation. And then the Acme Corporation staff and team is actually given access to their bucket, where when they log in, they won't see any other fellowship applications to other buckets because it's not relevant to them. What's also powerful about this is I can open up my buckets and it shows me 2 different tabs. One is a list of all of my fellow applicants. So in this case, Dr. Don Draper, Dr. Zoe Hart, these are applicants. And then it shows me my team. So what I can do to make sure I'm staying compliant and fair is I can actually target my entire review team, or I can go to my applicants and I can say, you know what, for the sake of compliancy, they all need to be looked at by 4 different people. So I can mass select them. I can click auto assign, and I can literally say, give each one of them 4 review members, and then by randomization, each one will be seen by 4 committee members. It's also nice because it allows us to do some manual pairings and kind of fine tuning of the pairings. So maybe, for example, there's a conflict of interest or one of my committee members is going on vacation. I can grab, say, for example, Barbara's name here, and then I can click manually assign, and I can actually pick and choose which applicants that Barbara will have access to when she logs into her account. So again, at a high level, 2 things are happening here. Number one is we're categorizing all of our fellowship applicants by quite a few different parameters that are up to you: fellowship type, categories, location, committees, phases, things like that. We're also then creating the actual review and selection process and workflow. So again, phase 1, phase 2, interviewing, and those all kind of play together in conjunction. So kind of bounce around. One other item that I want to touch on today, again, we will dive deeper to the entire, back-end admin command center in a future kind of webinar. But today I want to focus more on kind of at a high level what we're looking at here. But what I want to look at is kind of managing the data, right? So as fellow applicants create their profiles and begin their submissions, they're going to fall into this menu. And so on the fly, you can sort and filter by the different types of categories, the different types of phases, those buckets that we just looked at. And then you can simply click on the name of your fellow applicant. And then this is that profile concept that I've talked about quite a bit so far. And hopefully this helps resonate the power behind it. So right off the bat, we have Rose Nyland here, and she is our fellow applicant. And the first thing that we can see is the information that Rose submitted during her application. So all of Rose's personal information, her short answers, her essays. But as I scroll through here, you're going to start to get into things like file uploads, images, videos, all that kind of fun stuff. And so the power behind the profiles to make all of that very easy to digest and manage. So as an admin, I can jump up to the top, side by side. I can actually leave some notes about Rose's profile. I can communicate directly with Rose within Reviewr. I can move her from one workflow to the next. And if I jump up here to say, for example, the attachments, I can actually view a list of all the files that Rose or potentially external people have submitted on behalf of Rose. I can simply click on the name of the file. And then as you can see here, those documents are going to embed themselves right into Reviewr. So again, to kind of keep hitting this home, the idea is to use Reviewr from start to finish and then never have to use other external tools to do really anything with your fellowship process. So I can toggle back and forth. I can view the files. I can even leave notes and comments within the files themselves. I can toggle back to Rose's submission process and things like that. Now, fast forwarding, which we'll look at next, is like the review and selection process. Once the evaluations come in, within Reviewr, you can actually sort and filter by phases, by fellowship types, all those parameters that we discussed. And then it shows you a listing of all of your fellowship applicants. It shows you the team or the committee that actually looked at them. And then if you are using some type of scoring system or scoring parameter, you can actually see in real time both totals and averages. And then from here, move people from one workflow to the next. So for example, maybe we're going to take the top 3 in this category and we're going to conduct interviews with them. I could simply pick my top 3 and then advance them to interview phase or whatever we decide to call that. So at a high level, it's some of the main items here as an admin managing different types of workflows. The next thing that we're going to look at is the actual fellowship selection process and kind of how to do the review and selection within Reviewr. All right, so before we log in as one of those committee members or part of like the review and selection team, I'm going to keep this page open because when it comes to the review process of a fellow, that's very, I guess, up in the air, and those processes are up to you guys. We've seen literally everything from really comprehensive and robust scoring systems where the review team fills out ranking tools and scorecards. I've seen weighted scoring, while at the same time, there's also a very subjective kind of commenting and review process as well. So a lot of times this page will actually be used to power those deliberation meetings. So the committee will come in, they'll access the information, they'll access the fellows, they may fill out score sheets and scorecards, and then they'll hop onto a Zoom call, or sometimes it's even an in-person meeting, and then some type of like overarching admin or committee chair will pull this page, and then in real time they can say, okay, here's the results. So in this instance, David Rose is our highest rated applicant. However, if we look at the data, there's a bit of a discrepancy because Barbara gave it a 63, but Paula gave it a 100. So what ends up happening here is they can use this data. They can jump into David's profile. They can view all the information. They can even go to the evaluations and physically look at the scorecards that were submitted on behalf of David, and then let those review members kind of deliberate and talk about it. And then it's quite possible, maybe the scores don't tell the whole story. Maybe there's some type of subjective underlying factor that says, you know what, in this instance, even though Richard was the second highest rated applicant, Richard deserves the fellowship. Maybe Richard's a better fit or a better for the sponsor, whatever it might be. And so this allows you guys to kind of leverage data to power discussions, yet make decisions on your own versus kind of letting automation take over. So just wanted to quickly touch on that. Now, when it comes to the review and selection process, a couple of things are happening. So number one, if I go back to my buckets, again, this controls which staff members and committee members are able to see which submissions. It also allows you to have kind of very comprehensive review processes baked into it. So you might have like an internal phase 1, which might be like a quick thumbs up, thumbs down vetting. Phase 2 might be a full-blown scorecard where you're evaluating the applicants on the merit of the forms. But then maybe phase 3 is an interview. And so you have a completely different scoring system for phase 3 because, you know, it's for an interview. And so what ends up happening is you have these quote unquote scorecards or evaluation criteria that get assigned each individually to these different types of groups. Now, when it comes to the review and selection process, one common thing that we're starting to see quite a bit of is the blinding of data. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here as Damon, who is a review member. And when Damon logs into his account, he's going to see a menu of all of the fellow applicants that David's been assigned to, or Damon's been assigned to. In this instance, the data is not blinded. However, you could theoretically hide, first name, last name, demographic details. So really all Damon is seeing is two things: an ID number, and then the merits of the form that Damon should be looking at. But within Reviewr, it's actually quite simple in a good way. The idea is for your volunteers and for your review committee to come into one centralized place, gain access to all of the content that they need to make decisions, and then conduct the task. So I'm going to go ahead and click on, say, for example, Michael Scott, and Damon will then get a split screen. So on the left-hand side of Damon's page is Michael's profile. So this is all the information that we collected about Michael: the submission form, the file uploads, the deliverables, and then the right-hand side is the score sheet. We're going to kind of bounce around a little bit, not just the fellow selection, but also kind of the compliance and security behind this, because I think it's kind of a good topic to kind of lump together. Because again, to make sure that we're staying fair, inclusive, compliant, things like the first name and the last name can all be hidden. But then what we want to make sure that we're doing is that when fellows apply to your program, there's a very public statement that says, look, when Michael Scott applies for a XYZ fellowship, this is the entire process that Michael's going to go through. The number of people that are going to review Michael, the actual scoring system that's going to be utilized, and then baking that into Reviewr. So when the program wraps up, we can actually go back and show proof of process that when Michael submitted, he truthfully did go through that promised workflow. And we have the data and the processes and the workflows to back it up. So then again, kind of what we're looking at here is that side by side. The scorecards can be custom. So again, drop downs, checkboxes, weighted scoring. But the idea here is that your review teams and your review committees can very easily side by side fill out the score sheets, leave their comments, leave their notes. From a compliance perspective, it's all about cutting out any potential human error. So things like tabulations and results reporting actually happen automatically in Reviewr based off of the inputs into the system. So we can ensure that there was no kind of bias coming into play or accidental mess ups when tabulating the results. The other important element to this is that the scoring system can be shared back to the applicants. So not only can we show proof of process and that the applicant went through a compliant workflow, but if you want to, and again, it could be for both compliant perspective as well as just for self-development, you can share back this full-blown scorecard to the applicants. So maybe Michael does not get selected for a fellowship this year. Using our emailing system, you can notify Michael. Michael can come back into his profile and actually view anonymously either the entire scorecards that were filled out about him, so score, comment, or maybe you just want to share back certain elements to it. Maybe we're not going to share back the scores. We're only going to share back the comment boxes. That way there's some self-development and some self-growth. So that's kind of what I mean by the security, the reporting, and the compliance. Now, again, the idea here from a review perspective member, however, is to keep things very simple. So they come in here, they can view the profile, they can jump over to the attachments, they can do their communication, and then once they're done, boom, they press submit and they move on to the next. And then again, in real time, as an admin, you can track the results. You can also track progress, right? Because a lot of times you might need to follow up and send reminders to your committee members. So, have they logged in? How many submissions have been assigned to them? How many have they completed? Things of that nature. So again, we'll dive deeper into like the review and selection side of things in a future kind of webinar and discussion point. I want to make sure I'm being kind of sensitive to people's time today. Kind of the last thing that I do want to touch on is fellowships in their nature a lot of times are very private processes, and we're collecting some very secure information. So when it comes to kind of buttoning up these processes and workflows, it's not just about kind of managing the logistics of the program. Obviously, a reviewer is here to help every step of the way, streamline and optimize a significant amount of time from both an admin perspective, an applicant's perspective, and a review committee's perspective. We've already talked a little bit about how using a platform like Reviewr elevates the overall experience. But it's also important to keep in mind that we're not alone. A lot of times these programs have sponsors, there's partners that are involved. And so we want to make sure that we're also staying compliant. So things like SOC compliance, PCI compliance, penetration testing, all these often overlooked yet incredibly important elements that I think you should be taking a look at as you're selecting different types of tools to power these processes. For example, if we're doing a medical fellowship that's being done through email and Google Docs and web forms, how can we go back to our partners and to our sponsors and to our institutions and say that we're following a compliant process and that our data is secure? Right? We really can't. And so the idea behind Reviewr is to kind of have those already in place to protect not just you guys, but also partners and sponsors. So again, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Again, we'll be doing some additional webinars. Again, we're going to kind of talk through in more detail, more so on the data capture side of things. So information that we're capturing about the fellow, as well as ongoing fellow reporting, which we can kind of see here. Whereas if you open up a fellowship application, the idea is that there will be an edit button and that the applicant can come back and continuously add more and more to their profiles. They can communicate with mentors. We'll get into some of that. We'll talk more about some of the compliancy stuff. And then of course, some of the different, scoring systems and metrics in place. But as always, if anybody has any questions or wants to dive deeper into how Reviewr can be used to power your fellowship workflows or things that might make you guys unique, please don't hesitate, reach out. I'd love to connect. Thanks so much.